Yeah, so we've had really exciting news from the university today, which is they're going to take on this 10-month-long review of the potential to maximize the positive impact of their investments, as well as looking into their remit for doing so. So they're going to give them a foundation to make future kind of ethically sound decisions into the future, which is something that needs some developing. And now that sounds really dry, but it's actually incredibly exciting. The reason being, so in other universities, oftentimes the big issue around ethical finance right now is divestment. And that's certainly important. But it's just one of a range of tools you can really do to maximize the ethical impact you have with your finances. And when you just put a focus on that one tool too, when the priorities don't line up between, for example, universities and campaigners, then you just end up with rifts. And so the university is actually committed to this much more robust process of looking into all the options, seeing how and to what extent each one aligns with its own priorities, and developing for itself a toolkit for actually moving forward, meaning it's actually going to give itself a lot more potential to do good in a lot more nuanced, thoughtful way, which is quite a Cambridge solution. And we're incredibly excited. It's a very representative group. It's hopefully going to be robust, transparent, doing all the right things, so we're thrilled. Right, so there's a 10-month timeline right now for the working group to produce its recommendations, conduct its review and produce its recommendations, and then at the end of the 10 months it's going to produce a report. Now, reports at the university are non-binding, and it was sort of thought important that it isn't in this case, but they do tend to get taken very seriously. So that means, the university has to kind of issue an equally thoughtful response. And if, the thoughtful report says you should do these thoughtful things, then they have to kind of be equal to those recommendations in rejecting them if they do so.
So what we're interested in is taking a really good, thorough look at some advantages that could be taken as opportunities for long-term investors who are also what we call universal owners. So any large fund that owns basically a slice of the total stock market has an incentive to ensure the health of the economy as a whole. And so it doesn't really make sense then for 8% of the shares in the market representing fossil fuels to hurt the other 92%. So there are a number of strategies that might make sense for the university and other large institutional investors, like pension funds, that actually make up, by some measures, over a third of the total market. So especially the long-term piece and the universal ownership piece are big opportunities that have not necessarily been taken into consideration before. So we would like the university to look at a number of things that we've been researching on our own. One of them has to do with energy efficiency financing. That's been lucrative for a bunch of universities in the US. And we think that there's some scope for that to spread beyond the university, because after Cambridge did that sort of thing here, they would have experience with 800 years worth of buildings. We also think that there is some potential with pulling together other large institutional investors to cooperate on actually winning votes at annual general meetings, so that you could actually have meaningful pressure on companies to follow through with things like 2-degree compliant business plans, expanding renewable energy divisions, halting new exploration and development in particularly dirty, extreme energy sources such as the Arctic and so on and so forth. And we think that these should be thoroughly investigated, and we're really excited that the working group has the mandate to do that, because it's got expertise in a bunch of different areas, and we'll be able to pull in, kind of in an evidentiary hearing style type model, some further information from experts.
So over the next 10 months, what will you and your fellow campaigners be doing in the meantime?
Well, the two of us will be on this working group, so we will be performing a lot of research functions for it. As a group, we're planning on working specifically on college campaigns, pulling together bursars who are sympathetic to our plans. A lot of them actually are already curious about the energy efficiency financing, because they have old building stock they need to retrofit soon anyway, and the most efficient way to do that is to kind of blitz whole buildings and get all the efficiencies that go with that.
And I think another thing to set up, building on the kind of our interaction with colleges as well, which can be quite positive, is that this review is really in many ways the first of its kind, in terms of its scope, in terms of hopefully its rigor. And that's a huge resource to be developing, right? And it's a resource that, as Ellen noted, is developed in the context of the University of Cambridge, but is going to be useful for a lot of institutional investors, like colleges, but also like other universities and pension funds beyond Cambridge. So part of the work we're hoping to do is turning the specific toolkit into a more broadly usable toolkit and making this empowering for everybody.
Yeah, and you do need an institution like Cambridge to take the first move on something like this for it to be taken seriously by other large institutional investors, and that could affect trillions of dollars worth of investments. Yeah, that's one of the major issues with that piece of what we're investigating, actually. That, along with the behavioral side of things, because you can retrofit a building so that it uses very little energy, but if the occupants don't comply, then you still have a problem. I think that should all be a part of the research project, because there are things you can do about the behavioral side, there are things you can do about the planning and approvals side of things. But as you say, part of it is just scrutiny, right? And actually the research we will be performing will add to that, because there will be then a very clear mechanism for that to happen.
I think, as Ellen said before, it's also just about establishing a precedent. So a lot of this, it needs to have this narrow and more specific remit of being focused on the university and its endowment, and its buildings and resources. And so isn't going to necessarily take a direct line on kind of planning applications on a citywide level. But it is going to show that there's this alternative model for thinking about it, and actually that the university is hopefully going to take some steps from that model. Then that will impact the planning environment, right? And that will also show that there's opportunities to get involved in such thoughtful ways from other directions as well, hopefully.